Okay, so sentences are a pretty integral and important part of writing. Yes, I know that's a pretty obvious thing to say, but there's still a lot of errors that I see in people's writing, even when they're taking a class like advanced composition. So let's take a couple of minutes to go through what are the components of a sentence, what makes it up, what are some common errors to avoid in your sentences when you are writing. First of all, a definition. A sentence is a group of words that expresses a complete thought. For example, here's a sentence: the cat wore a hat. It's a complete thought. The reason that is a complete thought is because it contains the two important pieces of a sentence, the subject and the predicate. The subject plus predicate equals sentence. So in this sentence, the cat is the subject. The subject is basically who or what you're talking about in the sentence. It's the performer or receiver of whatever action is in the sentence. The predicate is that action. It's the action or state of being that's being expressed, and that is basically referring to the subject. So whatever the cat did, that's the predicate. The cat wore a hat. You should be aware that sometimes it can be tricky to figure out what the subject of a sentence is, but it's still there. It might be implied rather than explicitly stated, like in this sentence, run for your lives. Okay, so really what we're just seeing is a predicate, but we can infer, we can figure out who the subject is. Who is it that would need to be running for their lives? Well, in this case, the subject that's implied is you. Few other definitions. A phrase can make up part of a sentence, but it can't be a sentence by itself. A phrase is a group of related words in a sentence that does not contain a subject or a predicate. You know, you've got to have a subject and a predicate to make a sentence. A phrase doesn't have either of those. Let's look at a couple of examples here. Mr. Whiskers surreptitiously maneuvered himself into the vase. The orange part there, into the vase, is a phrase. It doesn't have a subject, doesn't tell me who or what's performing an action, doesn't have a predicate. There is no action in the words into the vase. It's just a phrase. Second example, sinking slowly, he immediately regretted his decision. The orange part again is a phrase, sinking slowly. No subject, no predicate. The subject in that sentence is he, and the predicate would be immediately regretted his decision. So it makes the sentence more interesting to have that phrase with it, but it can't stand by itself. Another type of group of words when we're talking about sentences that you need to know about is a clause. Unlike a phrase, a clause is a group of related words that does have a subject and a predicate. For example, cats always land on their feet. Okay, so that has the subject, cats, and it has the predicate, always land on their feet. This particular clause is called an independent clause because it can stand by itself and be a sentence. In essence, an independent clause is a sentence. There are other types of clauses that have a subject and a predicate that can't be a complete sentence. Let's look at an example. A dependent clause, unlike an independent clause, contains a subject and a predicate, but it can't stand alone. It needs to be attached to that main clause in order to make sense. Okay, so we've got a dependent clause here in orange. Although skydiving is not a typical feline hobby, cats always land on their feet. So if we look at the orange part, it has a subject, skydiving, has a predicate, is not a typical feline hobby. But if I just stop the sentence there after hobby, I would be left hanging. Although skydiving is not a typical feline hobby, it's not a complete thought. It can't stand alone. It needs this independent clause with it in order to make sense. The reason we need to know the difference between phrases, independent clauses, and dependent clauses is because when you write, you need to know what the phrase or clause is in order to make a complete thought. You could run into this common error of writing a sentence fragment. Sentence fragments are incomplete thoughts. They're missing either a subject, predicate, or both of them, and you should try to avoid those in your writing. Let's look at an example of a sentence fragment. Fluffy had always had one dream in life, to be a vacuum cleaner. Okay, so if we look at what's in pink here, that's a fragment. It doesn't have a subject. I don't know who or what we're talking about in this pink sentence. It's not a sentence, it's a fragment. It also is missing a predicate. What this is in pink is just a phrase, and I know that a phrase can't stand by itself. To fix that, I could add this phrase onto the first sentence here, combine them, and make it correct by writing a sentence like this. Fluffy had always dreamed of being a vacuum cleaner. That would be correct. Another way that I could fix this sentence fragment problem is to add a subject and a predicate to this phrase, like in this example. Fluffy had always had one dream in life. She wanted to be a vacuum cleaner. In this case, I added a subject, she, and I added a verb, wanted, here to make this predicate here. She wanted to be a vacuum cleaner. If you're not sure if something is a fragment or not, try using the is it true that test. In other words, what you do there is add the phrase is it true that in front of whatever it is you suspect of being a fragment and see if it makes sense. Okay, so I know that this second example is correct. So if I put is it true that in front of it, that'll make sense. Is it true that Fluffy had always dreamed of being a vacuum cleaner? That works. If I try this in front of the fragment, it won't make sense. Is it true that to be a vacuum cleaner? Doesn't work. I'm left hanging. So I know that this is a sentence fragment. Another common error that people make when they're writing is when they try to combine different sentences. Let's look at an incorrect way to do this and some correct ways to do this. Okay, so incorrect would be something like this. The cat is stalking her prey. She is ready to pounce. If you look closely at this incorrect sentence, what we have going on here are two independent clauses. I've got two sets of a subject and a predicate. First one here is the cat, subject, and this predicate that goes with it is stalking her prey. Then I have another subject, she, and another predicate is ready to pounce. So I basically have two sentences here, two independent clauses, and I tried to just shove them together without any punctuation or extra words. Can't do that. It's grammatically incorrect. Sometimes people try to shove two independent clauses together by just using a comma. They think that'll solve the problem. That's called a comma splice, and that's also incorrect. I can't just join these two independent clauses together with a comma. I need to find a different solution. So what I could do, like in this first example, is I could get rid of this subject here in my second independent clause and write a sentence like this. The cat is stalking her prey and is ready to pounce. Then I don't need any extra punctuation, and that's grammatically correct. A second way to fix this would be to add the word and in between my comma and my second independent clause. You can join two independent clauses with a comma and a conjunction, like or, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. So I could say the cat is stalking her prey, comma, and she is ready to pounce. A third possible way to join two independent clauses is with a semicolon. I don't need to add any conjunctions if I use a semicolon. I can just put the semicolon there and add my second independent clause. The cat is stalking her prey. She is ready to pounce. If you use a semicolon, you typically want to make sure that both independent clauses are pretty closely related. Finally, I could just separate these into two complete thoughts. Put a period and start a new sentence. The cat is stalking her prey. She is ready to pounce.